Over a year ago, I published a short video detailing my plans for a modified push mower, one which I'd gotten for free in late 2020 as something to fix up. These plans fell flat because they were lame, and I sort of fell into a slump afterwards. However, over the past summer, I decided to start finding ways to expel my misguided creative energy. I tried building a fort along the trails of my town, which went surprisingly well until one too many concerned citizens called in and had it torn down. We then decided naturally to use our remaining wood to make a plywood pontoon boat, which actually went pretty well until we tried expanding it, which led to it falling apart in the river, and it disappeared without a trace. Since I never wanted to see a 2x4 or a deck screw ever again, I turned to something I'd always wanted to do: make a dumb toy to ride around and suffer minor injuries on. I found one for $80, and I was able to negotiate it down to $70 because it was in rough shape. It had a fair share of charming issues. Most notably, the ignition was so broken that I had to be started with a screwdriver, as in touching two terminals together to engage the starter motor. Additionally, the battery was nearly flat, the tank was nearly empty, and it was very low on oil. We pushed our non-running mower across town for a bit before we figured we might try to get it running just to see if it even worked.
Dude, I swear to God.
Yeah, I'm standing. I was like...
Yeah, this didn't work, so we just kept rolling it until we got back to the house. The next day, work began. We started by taking a look over the whole mower. Engine aside, the drivetrain seemed to be in perfect working order. The steering worked well and was relatively centered. The headlight works, and the frame actually doesn't have very much rust eating into it at all. Since we initially couldn't even get it to turn over, we decided we'd try and charge the battery and just try and start it to see what we noticed. Immediately, we noticed that the engine cranked but wouldn't catch or ignite at all, so we replaced the burnt-out, fuel-soaked spark plug. The engine was now catching, but it still wouldn't quite start.
It's getting so close.
The first time it caught, a whole ton of gunk shot out of the top of the carburetor. At first, it was a sort of watery, brownish liquid, and then it gradually just became clear. Either this is unburnt fuel, or just water, gunk, anything just sort of making its way out of the engine. Either way, it continued to clear up as we kept starting and starting until it finally drew its first breaths. Do you notice that blue smoke? That is caused by burnt oil. This thing was eating oil like crazy. It probably almost definitely needs a new piston ring, maybe new valve seals. It didn't even seem to spin up to full RPM while we were running it, which suggests a high amount of friction, which we'll try and address. The next time it started, I panicked and went for gear to see if it would move.
Yeah!
It moves under its own power.
And it does. I mean, obviously it stalled immediately, but the drivetrain works. The engine really is pretty much all that needs addressed. After this, I kept replacing parts. The ignition was totally cacked, and the ignition key that went into it literally snapped in two the day we bought the mower, so I went out and bought a replacement. This one is in significantly better shape than the old one, so this will probably actually fix our starting issue. I also swapped out the fuel line, forgetting to put the fuel filter back on it, but thankfully I didn't run it after I did this, so yeah, I'll put that back on. And finally, I put in the correct grade of small engine oil off camera. After hastily slapping it back together, we eagerly turned the key to start the mower when we were greeted with a loud pop. The fuse in the ignition had blown, so we replaced it, and then it blew again. We think the wiring of the new ignition somehow isn't meshing correctly with the electrics on the mower, which will take some looking into. We tried starting it with a screwdriver again, but the battery quickly wore down, so we just popped it onto the trickle charger and went home. Yes, so apparently as the battery was charging, a stray spark that was thrown by it hit a cup of gasoline which had collected under the carburetor. We managed to extinguish the fire before any of the fuel in the engine or the fuel lines could burn up. The only damage done to the mower was to the paint as well as some of the wires, which we were going to replace anyways. So, at the end of this part, we finished with a mower which has had some improvements and some setbacks. Next time around, I'll be examining the engine and replacing some dodgy components. In terms of repairs, I plan to install a new air filter, check the carburetor jet valves and choke positions since they don't seem to be adjusting properly, make a better battery tray, lubricate, clean up the drivetrain, and possibly install a new piston ring. After the engine is fixed up and running properly, I'll start with the Go Fast business, a smaller pulley to increase the final drive ratio, new drive belts, and possibly some further weight reduction. I want to get as much speed as possible out of the current engine to try and keep this thing as cheap as possible. I've actually been steadily working on this bad boy, unlike the push thing, so I promise there'll be more videos in the future.